Hello, everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown, and we really do have some breaking news today. And it is kind of dear to my heart because this was a case I looked at many, many years ago when I first started out in profiling. It was the Shenandoah Park murders. Now, at the time, I live in Maryland, and this Shenandoah Park, National Park, is in Virginia. I've been there many times in my life. Took my children there for beautiful walks. It's a lovely place, unless you're murdered there, then it's not so good. Um, and this case happened around a time when there were, for whatever reasons, a whole lot of murders. Women that were abducted and found murdered, and it was not a good time. I have to say that. And so I was looking into a number of these different murders, and in this case was one of them. Let me just read you a little bit. I've got the Washington Post up here. I'm just going to read you a little bit of it, and then I'm going to go through some of the article and talk about the real issues here. Because I'm not a news channel, I'm a profiling channel, and I'm trying to teach how profiling works and how one should look at evidence. And I had problems with this case way back when. I thought there were a lot of jumping to conclusions that I did not think were supported by evidence, and it really bothered me at the time. But I didn't know. Maybe the police knew something I didn't know, that kind of thing. And sometimes that's true. Just because I'm not working with the police in the case, I don't have access to what they have. So sometimes they know way more. But then again, sometimes they're desperately trying to solve a case and they come up with some suspects that seem really good. And sometimes they even go through prosecutions with suspects I don't think they should have gone forward with. In this case, they had two suspects they were sure did it at different points. One guy, they were like going to take him to court, and then they dropped it. This guy is the new guy, number 3. There were two. I say this is like almost 3 strikes and you're out. They didn't even know who this guy was. So this is what makes it so very interesting. All right, let me read you a little bit about this. Federal authorities on Thursday announced that they now believe, I like the word now believe. You know why they now believe? Because before they didn't believe that this guy had anything to do with it, because they didn't even know who he was. They had other people they suspected and pursued, mind you. And they announced that they now believe a convicted serial rapist from Ohio killed the 2 female hikers nearly 3 decades ago at a secluded campsite in Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. Now, I want to point out the secluded part. Not as secluded as you would think. It was definitely down the trail a ways, and you had to walk off of the trail to find their campsite. But could somebody who wasn't a major hiker maybe find their campsite and do something to them? Yes. And this is important because sometimes when we have people who are found murdered at a campsite, it's usually kind of near, like wherever you park your vehicle and can walk in. You don't have to walk too far and you find them. Then you kind of don't know who could possibly be involved, because any serial killer could say, "Oh, Eureka, look, I just took a little stroll and here they are." If they're way far, far, far away, then you have a different kind entirely. And in this case, I think they were a little bit secluded, but not so far from the trailhead, I think it was from the lodge, that somebody who wasn't a hiker could have found them and done something to them. But on the other hand, it was enough secluded where I thought, was it a hiker? Anyway, let me read you a little more. All right. The stunning news of a suspect, this guy, whose name had not previously surfaced, came after new advanced genetic testing was conducted. And I want to point this out over and over again. One of the best ways to solve cold cases is DNA. Almost no cold cases get solved through brilliant cold case team going after things after the years and doing hundreds of hours of work trying to track everything down. The majority of the time, it's DNA, because that's the most logical method to use. And I'm not trying to put down cold case teams. My God, bless their hearts if they can work on this as much as they do. And once in a while, they actually, for some reason, find a way to to find the actual suspect, the real guy, by looking over what was overlooked before. But a good portion of the time, the best way is simply look at all your evidence and see what you didn't test way back when and what you can test now, because quite frankly, if you don't have DNA, you're not going to probably put anybody away anyway. How are you going to prove it all these years later? So, cold case squads aren't stupid. They know, do what works. DNA testing works. So they did this in this case and shockingly came up with this guy who they never heard of. And, it's incredibly frustrating as an investigator, as a profiler, to put all your efforts into people, you have suspects that and you put thousands of hours into that. And it turns out to be some guy you never heard of. And it's like, oh, what? But this is one of the important things about stranger homicides. This was a double homicide. Stranger homicides, stranger double homicides. That's a problem. They're strangers. It's not like you can say, oh my gosh, that's somebody who knew them. No. You don't have no clue who it is. And that's the problem. And there's more creepy guys running around out in the world than you would suspect, which is why they had the first suspect, the second suspect, and never had this suspect. Lots of creepy people. You're going to be just amazed at how creepy they were. All right. So anyway, they did new advanced genetic testing, and they brought answers. In the 1996 killings of Julianne M. Williams, who we call Julie Williams, and her partner, Laura Winans, we call Lollie Winans. So it says Julie and Lollie. They were partners, and this plays a part in one of the motives originally was considered a hate crime because two women were partners. They were obviously lesbians, having a romantic relationship. And was this a hate crime? And you have to be very careful of calling things hate crimes when there's no evidence that they are hate crimes. So if some guy stumbles across two women who are camping, does he even have a clue that they have a romantic relationship? Or they just, in his opinion, two available women he can rape and murder? So what happened? The identification Thursday of Walter Leo Jackson Sr. as a likely killer. Okay, they're putting in likely, which is interesting. I'm not quite sure why. Punctuated a case that vexed authorities for years. Investigators at points eyed at least two other men, one of whom was charged with capital murder. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. They actually charged the guy with capital murder without, in my opinion, a shred of evidence outside that he was a creepy dude. After prosecutors dropped that case because there was no evidence, court documents detailed evidence potentially linking the murderers to a dead serial killer, who was also a suspected dead serial killer, because, again, it wasn't absolutely proven that he was a serial killer, although certainly qualified, probably as well. All right, so who are these people, and who is this guy? We now know who is responsible for this heinous crime, said Stanley Meador, the special agent in charge of the FBI's field office in Richmond. He said new DNA tests from evidence match Jackson's profile in a computer database. Authorities said the genetic match to Jackson is 2.6 trillion to 1, more than 300 times larger than the world's population, an exceedingly strong probability of a connection in the realm of DNA testing. 100%. That's huge. And here people will say, well, what if there's one other person in the world, that has the same whatever DNA profile? Well, okay, but that dude was in Tokyo. This guy was in the Shenandoah National Park. That's the difference. Okay, so when you're looking at evidence and you're looking at DNA evidence, you also want to look at is there also evidence he was in the area to commit the crime at the time? Otherwise, you could say, well, maybe it was transfer evidence of DNA. Let's say touch DNA of some sort. Let's say, gosh knows, I'm making up something here just so you can understand. Let's say he worked at a camping store and he sold one of the girls a tent, and he touched the tent. And then when they test years later, because they have so much better DNA testing, they come up with his touch DNA, and that touch DNA matches him. He's like, I don't know these girls. I was working at REI, selling camping equipment. But this is not the way it goes with it. So I think they have the right guy. Why is that? A little bit about the case. The victims' throats had been slashed and their hands bound, and authorities said they'd been sexually assaulted. They were last seen on May 24th, 1996. Their bodies were found on June 4th. I'm sorry, June 1st. Make no mistake, this was a brutal crime. All right. He said there is no evidence for the killings of the couple to be motivated by a hate bias, as authorities initially believed. And here's one of the problems. Don't jump to conclusions because a person or persons are part of a particular group. Let's say a black person kills a white person. Is that a hate crime? Not necessarily. What if a white person kills a black person? Hate crime? Not necessarily. Transgender? Not necessarily. There's a lot of times when you're talking about psychopaths, they're not all that politically concerned or or particularly racially concerned. And sometimes you see this with mass murderers. That though I can't remember the guy. I think he's a guy that killed. I don't have his name in front of me. Who killed a whole bunch of people in a black church, and it was like, oh my God, it's a hate crime. It looked that way, but it turned out he had black friends, and it's like, what the heck? Well, if you want attention in the media and you're a mass murderer, pick something that'll get attention. So you have to be very careful of that because, first of all, the person's a psychopathic killer. So you're more concerned that you get this guy off the street and you get justice for the victims than you're going to try to figure out what his supposed motive is. A lot of times it doesn't really matter. Most of the motive for people who do this kind of crime is power and control. And how they get power and control sometimes is really just is not that important in the long run, because it's not like they're part of a terrorist cell and you got to make sure that you understand their motive so you can catch everybody else in the terrorist cell. This is just some loner loser dude who has his issues. So, you'll have, for example, incel guys, and they love to commit certain kinds of crimes, very violent crimes, often not sexually motivated because they don't much get sex in their regular life, but they're angry. They're angry, like, hey, nobody will go with me, so I'm going to take care of people, whether it be a group of people, like a school you want to shoot up as a mass murderer, or you want to kill off a bunch of people, maybe in Idaho, just because you're not popular. So you can delve all you want into the mind of a killer, and you're probably never going to actually understand what their real issue is, outside of the fact they're not happy people and they want to take it out on everybody else. So serial killers, on the other hand, when they rape and murder, it usually has nothing to do with the fact they can't get sex. Oftentimes they do have girlfriends, or they can pick up girls in bars, or they can pay prostitutes, or they even are married. So it's about power and control, and sex is one way to humiliate and torture your victim, and also have a good time, So anyway, okay. So let's see what happened prior to this. All right. So they did a full review of the case in 2021. Congratulations for the Richmond office. And he already died in prison, in Ohio. But who was this guy? All right. Jackson. Jackson. Well, let me tell you about the ladies just to let you know. Julie grew up in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. She was completing studies at the Unity College in Maine and was working toward being an accredited outdoor guide. They were totally into being out in nature. Wait a minute, I just said that wrong. Hold on a second. Okay, Lollie Winans was doing this. I love it when they just put the last names and then you can't remember which one you're talking about. Hold on a second. I just want to tell you what they were doing there. Williams from St. Cloud, Minnesota. And they met through an outdoor program for women, and both were described as experienced hikers. So Julie and Lollie were partners, but they're also experienced hikers, and they love nature. Now, this I try not to say piece of crap over and over, but okay. Jackson, who lived to 70 years old, was originally from the Cleveland area and worked as a house painter. Authorities said Thursday he had been convicted as a serial rapist as a part of a lengthy criminal history in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, that also included kidnapping and assault. All right, let's talk about serial rapists. First of all, I want you to clear up what a serial rapist is. We have some groups. We have what was known as date rape. And date rape is a kind of a different area where two people are on a date or have met in a bar and gone to a place by themselves and are spending time together. And a lot of times alcohol is involved, and you're never quite sure who did what and who said yes and who said no. And it's very confusing. A person who is accused of date rape, it may be a one-time circumstance where they were drunk and did whatever they did because they thought they had consent. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole argument on that, but I want to point out the difference between that and serial rapists. Serial rapists tend to rape people they do not know. They jump out of the bushes. They kidnap people. They attack people on their way home from the bus stop. They attack complete strangers. That is 100% different from what is known as date rape. In other words, two people who had some kind of possibly even their friends at one point. Maybe they were even dating, literally dating. They were gone on a number of dates, and date number 5 didn't go well. Or they got drunk, both come from a bar, but they had some kind of interaction and went someplace together where something happened. Can people be a serial date rapist? Well, theoretically, if you're just a scumbag, you know what I mean? You're some guy who just picks up girls and they're really drunk, and then you take advantage of them. Sure, you can be. Joran van der Sloot. I call him a date rapist with a rage problem. He's not a serial killer. Joran van der Sloot was two women that I know he killed, and both of them were they went along with him someplace. One to the beach, one to a hotel room. And I am assuming that both of those women had some reason to say no at some point, and it pissed him off, and he had a rage issue because he didn't select them specifically to rape. He selected them to go on it, to go have sex with, and then they had the indecency of saying no at some point, and it pissed him off. So he's a date rapist with a rage problem. So could you call him a serial? Maybe. But I want to talk about real serial rapists. Jump out of the bushes, grab some woman, don't know her, throw her on the ground, rape her, or abduct her and rape her. Let her live, but abduct and rape. You don't just do that once. So when people say they don't know if he's a serial rapist, no. You absolutely do. Because if a person grabs a complete stranger and rapes them, they are a serial rapist. I don't need to know who else they did or who else they're going to do. That's good enough for me. Because it's a line you don't cross unless you're a serial predator. All right. Now, the problem is sometimes serial rapists become serial killers. They're serial predators. So it's hard to know when they may only stay with serial rape, but then they may move into serial murder as well, and become serial killers. Why? It's possible because it turned out that those darn women that you raped, they had the audacity to go to the police and try to give a sketch, of you, and that you didn't appreciate that. So you said, I'm not going to leave one of those women alive again. So you move over into serial homicide for eliminating witnesses, or it's just not good enough for you. You enjoy killing too. So now you said, okay, I've done this. Now I kind of want to take it to the next level. So let me do serial murder. So anytime you're dealing with a serial rapist, that guy is an extremely dangerous predator. All right. So this guy had been convicted as a serial rapist as a part of a lengthy criminal history. The question I have is, what the heck is he doing out in public? Why was he ever, if he's a serial rapist, why is the man ever outside of prison ever again? This is one of the problems of the criminal justice system. A serial rapist should never see the light of day. But apparently he did, in spite of the fact his history included kidnapping and assault. Anyway, maybe I'm mixing up when he was finally figured out to be a serial rapist and was put in prison. I'm not absolutely sure. So maybe I'm jumping the gun on that. But I have an issue with that. All right. Federal authorities had initially, let's go back in time to who they originally thought killed these two women. Federal authorities had initially arrested another man in the killings of Williams and Winans. And in 2002, filed a capital murder charge against a man by the name of Darrell D. Rice, a computer programmer from Maryland. They said at the time they believed the attack was motivated by anti-gay, anti-women rage, which I don't know how they possibly would know that. But anyway, they cited mounting circumstantial evidence. Surveillance video twice showed Rice entering the park around the time of the killings. Now, let me read you the next part. He had attacked a woman in the park a year later, and he had a history of violence against women and reportedly made admissions about the case to prisoners. What's his name again? Darrell Rice. Was Darrell Rice a good suspect? Heck yeah. So don't fault the police for following a good suspect. One of the things you have to understand is that in the world of serial predators, you could throw a dart from your house and probably hit 8 of them. It's frightening. It is absolutely frightening. The number of serial predators that are out there of various forms. Darrell Rice was a serial predator. He was in the park. He attacked a woman in the park a year later, and he said stuff when he was in prison. You can't fault them for looking at this guy's, man, we got this guy. This is it. Darrell Rice. I was more like, do you have any evidence? Because I know how many serial predators are out in the world, and you cannot convict somebody based on the fact they are a serial predator. Now, mind you, nobody really, if you put them in prison, nobody probably care, but still, we're supposed to do things based on evidence. All right. They had an indictment against Rice. Well, the first time, prosecutors used a 1994 law allowing for enhanced penalties for crimes motivated by bias against gay people. Ashcroft, there's a John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, said then that Rice could be eligible for the death penalty because the concept is that if we can put forth that the guy doesn't, it's a hate crime. Hey, we can put Rice away, and for more than, I don't know why it has to be more. It's a double murder. Why do you need more charges? I don't understand it. It's like mass murder. We have to prove his motive was racial or was anti whatever. I'm like, but he just shot down 20 people. Who cares what his supposed motive was? And don't ask him. He'll probably lie. So anyway, all right. So but the charges against Rice were dropped in 2004, shortly before his trial, when forensic testing showed that hairs found at the murder scene excluded him as a possible suspect. So in other words, they had nothing, big zero on him outside of the fact he's a creepy dude who did come to the park and did attack a woman a year later. Enough to make him a good suspect, but not enough, in my opinion, for probable cause for arrest or for charging him with the murders, in spite of the fact you might think he done did it, Okay, so it excluded him. Now we get to suspect number 2. And then the hair instead could implicate another man, a convicted serial killer, Richard Evanets. Now, Richard Evanets is a whole nother story, and I will do a whole video on Richard Evanets. He had taken his own life in 2002 before he was implicated in the slayings of Spotsylvania County, Virginia girls. 3 girls were murdered. Sophia Silva, she was 16 years old. She disappeared from outside her house, and her body was found later on. And also this same guy who, and we know it's the same guy, the guy who abducted Sophia Silva from in front of her house also abducted 2 sisters, Kristen Lisk, who was 15 years old, and her sister Katie, who was 12 years old. And when we hear these days, when we think of Lisk, we think of Long Island serial killer, but I've always thought of Lisk as the Lisk sisters. These 2 girls were, they were abducted at the same time. Their bodies were found in a river. It was horrifying. It's definitely all 3 girls were connected by the fact that all of them were abducted, kept somewhere, tortured, and they had their pubic hair was removed, all 3 of them. So at any rate, the problem was this guy, I'm going to do a whole nother video, so I won't do it here, but Evanets, he was clearly, he abducted another girl. And as they were closing in on him for that particular case, he shot himself. They released some police dog on him, and he shot himself. The claim is that the girl was kept in his house and had some kind of furry handcuffs, and some of that furry handcuffs was in the car, in his trunk, along with supposedly one of the sisters' handprints was on the inside of the hood, the I guess a bonnet of the car. I forgot what the the trunk. I'm going British here. The trunk of the car inside. I've never been able to find the information in any kind of form, which to me gives me. I want to see the evidence. I want to see the pictures. I want to see the forensic reports, and I've never seen it. And he killed himself, and then this claim came up later. Could evidence, who was clearly was a predator, could he have killed Sophia Silver and the Lisk sisters? They could have, but I have an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach about that case, because I just didn't see that they really had evidence that connected him to the three girls, outside of the claim about some piece of furry something in his trunk and supposedly his handprint. And I'm going to have to go back and look. I worked on this case for quite a while. I had a suspect in the area who I was online with. I was posing as a 14-year-old, and I'm not saying that guy did it either, but he was very interesting. And but I just don't know that I believe evidence did it. So I'm going to I'm going to review all my notes, because I've got tons of them on that case. And I want to figure out what it was that bothered me back in the day. I mean, we're talking a long time ago, like over 20 years ago. And I don't quite remember. So I'm going to have to review all that. But I will do an evidence video and the Sophia Silva and the Lisk sisters, and determine whether I think they really had enough evidence that he committed those crimes. But was he a creep? Was he a predator? Yes, he was. He was a serial predator. There's no question. So just like Rice, he was a good suspect in this crime, except I don't know how they even put him in the area. And that bothered me. All right. So I don't know, because evidence, they got him on one crime. They're just saying, hey, he could have done this too. There were a bunch of women. Alicia Showalter was another woman who went missing out in Virginia. There's a bunch of people. And the question was this one serial killer, two serial killers? Who the heck knows? But I didn't see anything evidence being connected to this crime. But once they dumped Rice because they had no evidence, they went to evidence because evidence was dead. But it turned out it wasn't either one of those two guys. It's this guy. And I do believe it's this guy. Why? Let's look at this. They said he was known to visit Shenandoah National Park and was believed to be driving a 1984 chestnut brown AMC Eagle vehicle at the time of the killings. He often used temporary license plates and altered the plates frequently. He was a hiker. So his DNA is at the scene, and I'm having trouble thinking. I can't come up with any information yet that he sold them a tent or something, But he was a traveler. He was a hiker, and his DNA is at the scene, and he is a serial predator. I think they have the right guy, because DNA is, as long as it's not some silly touch DNA that's meaningless, means something. Okay, and I think the DNA at the scene means something. I think they had the right guy, but they didn't know who this guy. They had no idea who he was. So what they were doing, which is not unreasonable, is if you're investigating a case, you're going to go after people that you know who they are. It's very hard to go after somebody you don't know who they don't even know they exist. I mean, this is where people get very unfair about the police. They're not doing it. They're not working hard enough. No, they're working hard enough. It's a stranger homicide. They just don't know who to look at. And so unless they have somebody they can look at, they're guessing. They're in the dark about this. So they went after two guys who were clearly serial predators. One was actually at the park, which Rice was definitely a good suspect. I didn't ever think Evidence was as good a suspect because I saw no reason Evidence was even at the park. And just because he's off in Richmond area knocking off people doesn't mean he's off in the mountains of west part of Virginia attacking women. I never saw the connection there. Rice was way better. I'm like, but they couldn't prove anything. So eventually this case just went to sleep. And thank God the cold case picked it up. And now they got a dead guy who did it, which is convenient, of course, for them. But, if his DNA actually, Evidence, they never had DNA from Evidence to link him to Sophia Silva and the Lisk sisters. They never had DNA. So they don't have as strong a case. Now, if they redo that crime and come up with DNA matching Evidence to the three girls, I'm good with that. I found the claims kind of, I had trouble with the claims about the furry handcuff stuff in the car and one of the Lisk sisters' hands up on the underside of the trunk of the car. And I can't remember what it was. I had some issue to do with the heat, and I can't remember it because it's been 20 years. But I'm going to investigate that. But this guy, I think they got the right guy. But what's most important about this case is it goes to show you that, first of all, the police did work hard at it. I can't take that away from them. They had one good suspect, one questionable suspect, and they pursued it. And people are like, oh, they got the guy. But they never did. They had this guy popped out of nowhere because it's a stranger homicide. And so what happens here is that a lot of times when people say, why don't the police hone in quicker on somebody? It's because they don't know who it is. It's different when it's a husband, a boyfriend, somebody you can at least see the link between possible suspect and the victim. When you got women who are out just camping out there having a good time and some creepo just pops up and kills them, where's your connection? It's very, very difficult. And they never had the connection to him. And so they spent all their time spinning their wheels in all kinds of directions, desperately trying to solve this crime. So first of all, I want to say I have a little sympathy for the police. Also, I want you to understand that just because they say somebody did it, unless they have absolute evidence, maybe that guy didn't do it. And maybe you don't like the guy and you don't care if he goes away to prison or not because he's already a serial predator. I get it. But the important thing about profiling and crime scene analysis is that, and for prosecutions, is that nobody gets convicted unless there is a reasonable amount of evidence, a totality of the evidence pointing to them. Because just because a guy's a creep doesn't mean he did that crime. He might have done a crime a mile down the road, but he might not have done this crime. And that's the problem. Rice was there, and a year later, hey, it's a year later. Are you telling me that no other serial predators ever go to Shenandoah National Park? Of course they do. They like, they might like being out there and having those lonely women hikers just walking by themselves or camping by themselves, kind of a good hunting ground. So, a year later, that Rice found somebody else to attack doesn't mean he attacked these two women, which is the problem. So a lot of times when you're especially when you're in a city or in the suburbs, you'll see somebody gets abducted and you could like throw rocks at serial predators and say, oh, it could be this guy, it could be this guy, it could be this guy. And the police are trying to figure out, they certainly the kind that could have done it, but did they do it? And that's the question. Because if you put away the wrong guy or claim the wrong guy did it after he's already dead, like evidence, do you leave a dangerous person out in society? And that to me is more important than supposed what people call justice. We found the guy who killed the person. The family gets justice. The victim gets justice. Well, that's fine as long as it is the person, because if the wrong person is convicted based on, oh, and it's so wonderful, we got justice. No, you didn't. You've left a killer out there to kill other people. There's no justice in that because a serial killer will kill again and again and again and again. If you got the wrong guy, you leave maybe a decade or two for that serial killer to go on and kill other people. That's not justice for the next 10 or 20 women. That's not justice. So we don't want to have false justice. We want to have real justice, and we want to get the real person off the street. So I just found this a very interesting case because I had never heard of this guy either, and yet he appears to be the guy that actually killed the two women, and is a serial killer. Um, so it wasn't the other two guys. Not that they weren't, not that they were good guys, but they weren't the guy. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the case for now, and I will do a whole thing on the evidence and the Sophia Silva and the List sisters. I'll do a whole show on that when I go back through all of my notes. So anyway, if you're new to the channel, please do like and subscribe. This is an educational channel. I hope you appreciate that. I'm not here to solve cases. I'm not here to just spread gossip. I'm here to help people understand how things work in profiling and crime scene analysis and in the real world, and not just on the internet. So thank you for being here, everybody. Till next time. Bye.